Widely considered one of the top contemporary mystery writers, Alafair Burke is the author of 20 best-selling crime novels. A former prosecutor with a lifelong interest in true crime, her novels combine classic detective fiction with legal thrillers. Alafair's books include the long-running series featuring NYPD Detective Ellie Hatcher and Portland Deputy District Attorney Samantha Kincaid. She also co-wrote the Under Suspicion series with mystery genre royalty Mary Higgins Clark. Alafair is the current president of Mystery Writers of America. In Alafair's newest thriller, Find Me, the disappearance of a young woman leads Detective Ellie Hatcher to clues about a notorious murderer with ties to her own family. For today's conversation, Alafair is joined by her friend and fellow suspense author Michael Connelly. Internationally best-selling master of crime fiction, Connolly is the author of 36 novels, including the Harry Bosch series and the Lincoln Lawyer series.
Hey, Alafair.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
The book here that we're going to talk about, Find Me.
Yay,
And,
it found you.
I have some questions here. The first one, I would normally summarize this book, but I'm going to ask you to do it the way you want to do it, because it's a very deeply plotted book. At times it's a detective story, at times it's a legal thriller. It's just got a lot in it, and I'm always careful about what you would want revealed. But is there a short way of summarizing this book?
Is there a short way? The shortest way is a woman named Hope goes missing. So then her best friend seeks to find her, right? So that title, Find Me, is a woman named Hope Miller is suddenly disappears after relocating to a new town. Her best friend, Lindsay Kelly, is convinced that something's wrong and will stop at nothing to find her. So that's kind of the one sentence summary. But I think, Mike, you're right that there's a lot happening. So to me, the real heart of the book is the friendship between these two women and the very unusual way that they become friends. It's the heart of their friendship. It's kind of the reason why they have a special bond, but it might also be the link. It might be the answer to why Hope is missing. So the thing that's really unusual about Hope is that she doesn't know that her name is Hope Miller. She had to choose that name for herself because 15 years ago, she was found by Lindsay. That's how they met. She was found thrown from an overturned SUV. She had no ID with her, no money, and it turns out they later find out that the car was stolen. And Lindsay, because she kind of saves her life at the side of the road, becomes very invested in helping this girl that she found, and they become best friends. And 15 years later, Hope has had to choose a name for herself, make a life for herself, when she really still has no explanation of who she actually was in the past, where she came from, or how she wound up in this small town. So when she goes missing, some people thought, well, maybe the past came to find her, or maybe she was making it up the whole time, or maybe she just wanted a fresh start where this small town didn't think of her as that poor girl that has no background and no memories. But because she and Lindsay have this special bond, Lindsay knows that there's no way Hope would leave without telling her. So that kind of kicks off the plot. And then, of course, other things happen after that. But so you have, the search for Hope in the present inevitably winds up having to find out who she was in the past. So you kind of do have these two timelines going on.
I kind of marveled when I read this about how you put it together. How long did it take you to put all this together? I love books. It's right in my, it's a picture of a plate for me, because I love the things where the past comes back up and comes out of the ground and grabs you in a way. When did this book start creeping into your imagination?
Normally I would not have a an interesting answer to that question, because normally I have an idea for a book, I start writing it and it's done a year later or about. So this book, I actually started it after I published The X, which I think was in 2014, that long ago. The X was a standalone. This book kind of started out as a hybrid book, which is what it is, but it looked completely different then. I can't give too much away, but there was a woman, she had a different name, but kind of the origin of the story is, I'm always fascinated by memory. I'm fascinated by people who have, there's a condition where people remember everything. They remember every single thing that happens on any given day. And then there's people who have the opposite, or some people, they don't have facial memory, but they can remember other things. I find all that really interesting. And there have been real life cases of people who just turn up. It's usually an unusual circumstances, right? They just appear seemingly out of nowhere or in a distress situation with no idea who they are. And usually that, is a temporary condition, and they get their memories back, within days or weeks. But there have been cases that go on for years or even into the, past a decade, where people don't know who they are. And so I had that kernel of an idea, and I knew that the search for that person was going to lead to a certain backstory that I won't give away. But there wasn't a friendship, not the one that Hope and Lindsay have together, which again, to me, is really the heart of the book. The narrator of the book back then was like a woman in the victims advocates unit of the district attorney's office, who was much more of like an investigator than Lindsay is. So it just wasn't, I was working on it. It was working fine, but then I had the idea for the wife, which was very timely. So I wrote that. Then I wrote The Better Sister. I'm like, I want to get back to this book. So it's been a long time coming, and it's the only book I've ever written that's really changed a lot as I wrote it. And I think it was for the better, obviously, because I can't imagine the book without that friendship in it.
When Hope disappears, one drop of blood is found, and there's a DNA typing done on that, and it leads in a interesting direction, new direction. And so it brings in a longtime character of yours, but not till I think 50 or 60 pages in. But it was interesting that blood that leads to this character is early on in the book. So it was not like, I could just throw her in here now. It was part of this long-term plan, I think. And I don't know when you could just say, yes, that's correct, or you can expand on that.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, and that's not a spoiler. That's on the book jacket. So we're still in safe territory. But that was the original kernel of the idea, is a woman disappears. The search for her leads to, the last place she was seen. Lindsay finds a little mark that she thinks is blood and kind of tricks a police officer into kind of humoring her by shining a light on it. And then, of course, it turns up that it's blood. And then she won't let that go. And when they throw it in the DNA database, it hits to a crime scene from an old serial killing case in Wichita, Kansas. And you don't need to know, you don't need to know anything about the role that old serial killing case has played in my other books. But if you have read my past books, that serial killing case kind of shadows over a police detective in New York called Ellie Hatcher. And so at that point, Lindsay contacts Ellie Hatcher to say, hey, tell me what you know about the serial killing case, thinking that maybe Hope's the latest victim. And when I started the book, it was kind of that idea was there. But let's just say some surprises happen from there. But Ellie kind of gets pulled in, not as a police officer, but from a personal perspective of wanting to know, hey, what is the connection between this bloodstain out in East Hampton, and how does it connect back to Wichita, Kansas? And does it have anything to do with Hope's disappearance?
You want to talk about that, your own connection to Wichita, Kansas, and I don't know what the right word is, association of fascination with the real case there?
Yeah, so there's, my parents moved to Wichita, Kansas in 1977, I think, from Southern Florida. And at the time, all I knew was that Southern Florida had a beach and Wichita, Kansas did not. So I was I was having none of it. And they said, oh no, it's going to be better. It's safer there and you'll have a better school and we'll have a nicer house. And they kind of made it sound like we were going to have this very picket fence life that we didn't have in Lauderdale. So we get there, and in my mind, we were still moving in. Like, we still had boxes to unpack when the local news announced that there was a serial killer who called himself BTK. Some people might have heard of that. It stands for bind, torture, and kill, which are 3 words that you really don't want to hear together, especially when you're 7 years old. It was just a strange way to grow up. It was, if you took a map of where his various victims were killed, our house was like right in the middle. And so that whole generation, it wasn't unique to me. Like, you were in the habit of the minute you got home, you would check the phone line back when we all had landlines, because it was rumored that he would cut the phone lines. Everybody had locks on their basement doors. Like, it's still very unusual to me that I don't have like bolts on my basement doors, because the thinking was that he came in through the basement. In reality, once they caught him, it turned out that he just talked himself right through the front door. So in any event, I think that always kind of haunted me, and I was interested in it. But then when I realized, like, I didn't really want to write about him, I didn't want to bring attention to him. And I kind of forced myself to ask, like, why am I so interested in that particular case? And it was the personal connection to my background, and like just growing up kind of haunted by that the idea that somebody who could be your neighbor, he turned out to be a church president. He turned out to be like a code enforcement officer in a suburb outside of Wichita. So somebody who could blend in with a crowd could have this dark side that could just bring complete danger into your house. And so I created Ellie Hatcher has, her father basically was haunted by that case. So she grew up seeing the crime scene materials. She grew up hearing her father talk to her, even though she was a young girl, about this case. And so it's always formed sort of the kind of demons inside of Ellie Hatcher are from this killer. And so I liked the idea of having the case not really being centrally about that case, but it's more that you somehow Hope's disappearance is linked to that. And so it kind of brings Lindsay's no longer working on her own, trying to solve these problems. She now has Ellie Hatcher trying to help her, but kind of for her own reasons. Ellie sort of has the ulterior motive to try to figure out the connection, if there is one.
So this story revolves around, on the page, 3 different women. There's Hope, there's Lindsay, and there's Ellie. Was there one character that was the through line, who pulled you through the story, who you felt like you're riding with this character?
I think that's what took me a while to get the book right, because when I first started it, like I said, the narrator was somebody who knew Hope from an investigative capacity, right? She was her assigned victims advocate when Hope was trying to, go through, trying to find an identity. And I think that's the part that wasn't working. And so that's why I set it aside. And I'm like, if this story is going to work, there has to be a person. It can't be Hope, right? That she's missing. So she can't be the person. And Ellie's connection is also not directly connected to Hope. So like somebody had to really care about Hope. And that was Lindsay. So when I figured her out, that's when the book clicked. I already had Hope figured out, but the problem is the reader, of course, since Hope is missing, is learning about Hope through someone else's eyes, right? And so I needed the right person for that. And I think a lot of women, especially, I know male friendships are great and everything, but I think female friendships, there's something kind of unique about them that people can become like sisters, like you're joined together, like connected, whether you're with each other or not. And I think Lindsay and Hope are like that. And they meet at a time in their life where, Lindsay just got out of college. They meet like right at the right age, to really form this friendship as young adults. And they're so connected that, I don't want to give too much away, but Lindsay kind of comes to learn that other people who care about her always wonder if maybe she cares about Hope a little too much. Like, does she give too much of herself to this friend, always kind of trying to run in and save her problems, solve her problems? And has that made Hope too dependent upon Lindsay? Like, maybe part of the reason why Hope can't really go forward is she's still kind of glued to this person who knew her when she was just that girl, like in the car accident. So, maybe the two of them need to be apart. And that's, one of the theories is that Hope left because she actually wanted to force herself to live a life without Lindsay's support. So that for me is kind of what made the book click, is these two women and how they connect to each other.
In your summary of the book, you mentioned long-term amnesia, and that is like a gimmick that's used in every form of storytelling.
I know.
And I couldn't think of a better word than gimmick, but what I'm saying is you de-gimmickize it by your research. And I was just wondering if you want to expand a little bit more on that, because I thought that was pretty fascinating. And it is helpful in this book to almost go into that being skeptical, like other people in the book are, and to kind of fluctuate back and forth on whether this is legit or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's so familiar a trope that, like, I didn't look. When I write books, I kind of write them for myself to some extent. Like, I would want to read this book, and I think it's really good. And then it's not until you go out and try to sell it to other people that you start thinking about what it sounds like as a sales pitch. And it's almost to the point where I'm like, please forgive me, but the book is about somebody with amnesia, because that sounds like it will be corny, but I promise you it's not corny. It's almost like the things that sound made up actually aren't. So there have been cases of people who don't know who they are for over the course of years. And I did do a lot of research in what that's like. So for example, I would have assumed, like, okay, maybe after, just like when someone's missing for a certain amount of time, you can declare them dead so that people can go on with their lives. And you don't have to stay married to a person that's presumed dead. You can remarry, right? There is a way to declare someone dead. If someone is found alive but unidentified, there's no formal legal mechanism to help them create a new identity. And that seemed impossible to me, but I wanted to make sure I got it correct. But you can't just start giving people driver's licenses and made up birth certificates and social security numbers with just based on their say-so of, oh, I forgot who I was. Because if you think about it, the risks for fraud are extremely high. And then the number of times it's going to be legit low enough, right? That no government incentive exists, like, to make that process work. And then there's not even there's a national database for missing people. And there's a national database for dead people who are unidentified, right? So that if they find a dead body, they can go into the database of dead identified people and missing people and try to connect the dots, right? There is no database for found people who don't know who they are because there's so few of them. Some states have started them, but there's not a national one. So Hope's in this limbo. And there's parallels to other people in the book, who are living in kind of this state in which you have no legal identity and yet are expected to live your life. So that makes it very difficult to find her. So for example, she doesn't have a car registered in her name because Hope Miller does not exist as far as the state is concerned. So she drives a car that is technically owned by Lindsay. So when Hope goes missing and the police aren't taking it seriously, Lindsay's father, who's a cop, tells her, you can always report the car stolen, right? Because then the police might stop it as a suspected stolen car. But then she has to think, okay, then they're going to be stopping her not to help her. They're going to be stopping her because she's a suspect in stealing a car. And then she won't have a driver's license. So I'm basically just going to get her arrested and potentially, hurt by the police. So, it makes it a lot more complicated to look for someone who doesn't even have a legal identity.
Yeah, I mean, just that stuff, that the thinking that went into whether or not to report the car stolen is part of the marvelous engineering of this book, the plotting of it, everything. So after you wrote this book, did you just need a vacation or something, or dive into another project? Can you talk a little bit about what you're up to now, or what you're going to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us, given the last 2 years have been, but we can talk, I don't know, people might be COVIDed out of listening to what writers' lives are like during this. I mean, some people have been extremely productive. Like, this is what I've always wanted, is to be locked inside and all I have to do is write. I get energy from other people, however, and that energy from other people helps fuel my work. So I don't like being locked inside by myself. But I am working. I'm working on my next solo book. But also, this is somewhat news to people. So Mary Higgins Clark, I was lucky enough to be her co-author on a series that we wrote 6 books together. But she and I had talked about this, and everyone has decided to go through with it. So I'm working on a sequel to Where Are the Children? So it kind of looks at that family, 40 years later, that iconic book. So I feel a heavy responsibility with that because it's such a beloved book, and to be doing it without her is a little, feels like some weight, but I'm really excited about it. I think people like it. And then I have my next standalone book too.
Going back to this book, here it is again.
Yes.
It's
pretty.
When I've started, I've started books with new characters over the years, and I usually only think of them as that one book, and then I decide by the end of the book whether I'll see the character ever again, write about the character ever again. Will we? I assume we're going to see Ellie Hatcher again. Will we be seeing any Lindsay Kelly or anybody from this book again?
I don't know. I always say no. It's a standalone, but my book, The X, was a standalone. About a defense attorney who had to defend her ex, but then she turns up, she's the defense attorney for the clients and the wife and the better sister. So, I mean, you do this, right? You created Harry Bosch's world, right? Are you on 30 Bosch books by now? But tons of Bosch books. But, you spin out the world and all these people kind of exist and turn up in each other's books. And so I could see something like that happening. Lindsay Kelly's a defense attorney, but she's not really being a defense attorney in this book. She's kind of almost ignoring her job to go look for hope. But I could see her potentially, turning up in somebody else's stories.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of courtroom stuff and legal stuff, but here you are, you're a former prosecutor, you're a law professor. Do you have to hold yourself back from like that seems to be the kind of stuff that you could almost write in your sleep, not that you would.
Yeah.
It was very sparing in this book, which at the end of the day, I thought, well, that's kind of surprising that she didn't, use all of her own legal firepower and get it into the book. I know you've done it in the other books, but not like an intention.
Yeah, I kind of censor myself in certain, I got to kind of remember what type of book I wanted the heart of this book really to be their friendship. And the more Lindsay's bossing people around as a lawyer, the less it becomes about that to some extent, unless she's doing it, where she does go into that mode, it's very much about, I'm willing to do anything to find hope, even if that means kind of walking a line sometimes. My early books, not that anybody would want to do this, but if you want to go way back to 2003, my first 3 books were part of like a legal procedural series featuring a prosecutor named Samantha Kincaid. And I still love those books. I like them, but to some extent, I don't know if you read those and then read my more recent books, you might not even realize they were written by the same person, because I think I leaned really heavily into my legal knowledge in those books because it made me feel more confident as a writer. When you first start, your first book, it's kind of an audacious thing to do. Like, I'm just some unpublished person and hey, I'm going to write a book. And, I was a lawyer. I hadn't studied writing, and I think what in my mind, I'm like, oh, what's going to make me good about this is I know a legal world that other people don't really know. And so that's what's going to make me special. And I think with time, I've become more confident that no, I can just write a book and I don't have to put on that lawyer hat unless it's really called for. I like doing it, but I have to kind of ask myself, does this advance either plot, character, or sometimes setting, right? To help kind of create that atmosphere of a police precinct or a courtroom. If it doesn't need to be there, I pull it out. I take it out.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on the thing I think everybody does, or most people do, is you start out writing what you know, and then you kind of transition into writing what you don't know yet. And
right.
And you follow things. Is there something in particular about this book that you didn't know about till you got into it? I mean, the Amnesia stuff comes to mind, but anything else?
I had to use my imagination more. I didn't live in a big city until, I was well into adulthood, but I never really lived somewhere really small, like incestuous small, like where everybody knows everybody. And it played a big part in the book. And it's not the setting of a small town that matters, like the physical descriptions of it. It's that idea of, it's plausible that even though it's the only world Hope knows, living in this little tiny place where everybody kind of takes care of her, that she might actually walk away from that. Like that it starts to feel overbearing, or that she's too dependent on it. Like it had to be credible that she might just really risk everything to leave. And so I think kind of the depiction of that world, which is all kind of in the past tense, just like, the lady who gives her a job, right? And the reasons why she's willing to do it, the couple that lets her live for free above their garage, their garage apartment, like just it's almost like creating a little Gilmore Girls world. If people watch the Gilmore Girls or any other small town, Schitt's Creek, like all the little characters that inhabit this town. So I had to kind of do some work on that. And then, like I said, the memory research, I had to, I kind of have been doing that as almost like a side hobby for years. If I read something really interesting about memory, I used to physically cut it out of the paper and put it in a folder. Now it goes, into a folder in the cloud.
Oh, that's good. All right, I got one last question. It's the typical Hollywood question. Is anything brewing in Hollywood for this book or any book, any of your work?
I mean, it depends what you call brewing, but some things are closer than others. But I'm not actually like programming my TiVo yet or buying advanced tickets to study movies. So I think the ex, the better sister, and the wife are all in various stages of development, and I wrote the screenplay for the wife. And then I think Find Me is getting submitted. Yeah. So it hasn't even gone out yet. It's out there. Yeah. If anybody out there wants to find me, it's available.
I think both titles it's available in it would be really good titles
what?
for a movie. Both titles that you can get this book in. I think
I know
really good as
maybe I should have kept it simple and just done The Girl She Was. A lot of people don't know this is like how the sausage gets made, but publishers like start working on the artwork and titles and putting stuff into catalogs like well before, like a whole year before the book comes out. And so a year ago, I was kind of like, oh, The Girl She Was, like people will be tired of those like girl titles by then. Apparently not. It keeps going and going. So,
well, I said it was last, but there's a follow-up. You wrote a screenplay, and did that experience send you screaming back to your writing room to just write a novel without anyone being involved?
Yeah, I found it more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I was kind of like, oh, a screenplay will be fun because you don't have to like really describe things as much. You can just strip it down to the basics. It's a lot of dialogue. And it actually is, I don't think I realized how much internal monologue I have in my books until I tried to write a screenplay. And it's actually the parts of the books, like as a reader, I love an internal monologue. So I found it a little difficult, but I really did enjoy it. Yeah. I think I did pick up, forcing you to strip something down makes you realize how much can be cut. And so I do think like people who have read Find Me, one thing they do say about it is like it's very readable, like you can finish it very quickly. There's not a lot of pages you're going to want to skip. And I think writing a screenplay can help me do that of, does this really need to be in here or not?
Alafair Burke, thank you very much for the discussion of Find Me. It's a really good book. I'm glad I read it.
Thank you. I like seeing my book in your hands. And thank you so much, Michael, for your time. Thank you so much to the St. Louis County Library for inviting us to do this. And thank you for those of you who are watching. Bye.